No more automatic death penalty for murder. Tropical storm Isaac barrels towards the Eastern Caribbean. And coming up in sports, the CPL gets down to the business end of things.
Credible, balanced, committed. This is the CBC Evening News.
Good evening, I'm Shane Jones, leading the news at 7. People convicted of murder will no longer automatically face the death penalty. This from Minister of Energy and Water Resources Wilfred Abrams as he led off debate on the Offences Against the Person Amendment Bill 2018. Mr. Abrams says there are usually mitigating factors which should be considered before the death penalty is applied.
Very often when the prosecution presents its evidence first before the magistrate's court, effectively to test the evidence, very often, or in a number of circumstances, the magistrate found that while there was enough to sustain a charge, the appropriate charge should not actually be one of murder, but one of manslaughter, because the incidents or the details or the peculiarities of the case or the circumstances of the accused or the behavior of the deceased suggests something else other than premeditated, wanton, and malicious killing.
Mr. Abrams outlined some of the circumstances provided in the amendment where the death penalty may be applied.
This is what the court has to factor into when making the sentence of death. A court may sentence a person convicted of murder to death where A, the murder was committed with a high level of brutality, cruelty, depravity, or callousness. B, the murder involved calculated or lengthy planning. C, the deceased was a judge, a magistrate, the director of public prosecutions, or a legal officer in the Department of Public Prosecutions, and the office of the deceased was a factor in the commission of the offense.
A government backbencher is calling for police to have more options when charging a suspect with killing someone. It comes from Christchurch South Representative, Queen's Counsel Ralph Thorne, who has also practiced criminal law for a number of years. Mr. Thorne explains a suspect can now only be charged with murder or manslaughter, and he believes that has an impact on the jury.
To be honest, sometimes you get a sense that a jury believes that the verdict or the penalty for murder is so severe that what may otherwise be murder, they reduce to manslaughter. I'm not a prosecutor, but I will say this, that I suspect that there are juries who have found men guilty of the lesser offense of manslaughter simply because they don't want the man to hang. There are cases in which they may well believe that it fits within the category of murder, but they go for manslaughter as a compromise.
In response, opposition leader Bishop Joseph Abley says the amendments to the act may protect the human rights of those convicted. However, he thinks the rights of the people affected by their actions should not be overlooked.
Because at the end of the day, we must never lose sight of the fact that no matter what my rights might be as constituted legally, when I infringe on the rights of others, I imperil myself and run the jeopardy of losing some of those rights. And I'm just trying to say that while we discuss this and while we understand where these trends are taking us and why we're here today and doing what we're about to do, we also have always to ensure that we do not lose sight of the fact that my rights are not at the expense of the rights of others.
As Tropical Storm Isaac moves closer to the region, watches and warnings have been issued for several Caribbean countries. However, Barbados is not listed among them. Joining us now is to bring us more up to date on the system is Salma Green. Good evening, Salma.
Good evening to you and good evening to you viewers. Yes, that system is still in the Atlantic, headed our way, and we're going to be able to see it now on our satellite picture. Here is Isaac headed towards the region. Right now the center is at 14.6 degrees north, 51.3 degrees west. That's about 560 miles to the east of Barbados, 670 miles to the east of the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. It's packing winds of 70 miles per hour. Isaac is a tropical storm at the moment. It's moving towards the west at about 17 miles per hour. And at the moment, there are hurricane warnings, hurricane watches in effect for Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Dominica. And there are tropical storm warnings in effect for Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as Montserrat. The good news for us is that that system is expected to pass well to the north of Barbados, but we are going to begin to feel its effects just after midnight tonight, and I'll tell you more about it when we come to the full details of the weather news a little later on.
Thank you, Salma. With the busiest week in the hurricane season upon us, residents in a rural community are facing the threat of flooding, and it's all because of poor dumping practices by some Barbadians. However, a government agency is working swiftly to get it rectified as a weather system takes aim at the region. Kareem Smith tells us more.
I fear, especially now that I come to be in this position I'm in, I fear it very much because I can't maneuver like before. So
that's Cal Best, a wheelchair-bound resident of South District St. George, expressing concern about the threat posed to him due to flooding. This well, which is intended to assist with drainage, has instead been used as a dumping hole by members of the public, making the problems even worse. Further investigations by the drainage unit reveal that the well had never been cleared since it was dug some years ago. With the threat of Tropical Storm Isaac looming in the Atlantic, residents are thankful the drainage unit got there first. Richard Gibson, personal assistant to MP for the area Dwight Sutherland, gave some insight into the challenges.
Even 10 minutes of water, 10 minutes of rain falling, they receive a torrent going past their house, and it's been actually threatening their foundation. So we're actually doing our best now to alleviate that problem and see if, once we get the well sorted out, if there's any further work that needs to be done.
A member of the drainage unit working tirelessly to clean the drains acknowledged that he had a job to do. Choosing not to be pictured on camera, he vented about the challenges he faces because of poor disposal of garbage.
It's like a sack, you know, it's supposed to drain off the water, right? But we know litter in form of debris. Sometimes you find eggshells in here, or clothes, bicycle rim, pet bottles, all kind of things. All those things need to go to the recycling center at the end of the day, right? You can't put it in a well.
He's pleading with citizens to honor their responsibility to their neighbors. Kareem Smith, CBC News.
There are some new developments in the effort to appoint an Anglican bishop in Barbados. The CBC has been reliably informed that the Regional House of Bishops will be in Barbados for a meeting with the local synod early next month. Their intention to visit was communicated by Senior Bishop Errol Brooks. This was outlined in an email sent to members of the House of Clergy from Diocesan Administrator Canon Wayne Isaac earlier today. A source tells CBC News Bishop Brooks wrote to the administrator here requesting a meeting with the House of Laity on Tuesday, October 2nd at the Ivan Herwood Parish Center in Christchurch. This will be followed by another meeting on Thursday, October 4th with the House of Clergy at Codrington College. The source says this indicates the House of Bishops has not made a decision on who will replace retired Bishop Dr. John Holder and wants to hear the views of the local synod on the matter. Now, if you remember, back in July, the local synod voted to refer the decision to choose to the House of Bishops. Neither Dean of St. Michael's Cathedral, Dr. Jeffrey Gibson, nor Rector of St. George Parish Church and Rural Dean of St. John, Reverend John Rogers, could garner the 2/3 majority needed to take the post after 10 rounds of voting. The homeless should not be forgotten in hurricane preparation. This is the cry of President of the Barbados Vagrants and Homeless Society, Kimar Safri. Mr. Safri is pleading with the authorities to do what's necessary so he can start moving the homeless into a building in the city identified to house both males and females.
And once we can hurriedly get this funding drawdown and also the approval from the ministries for the Barat license and what's not that we will need to operate this shelter, once it is done, we will be ready to move in terms of having our own shelter for both females and males, because you can I don't know if any of you know, but there's actually no shelter as it relates to females in Barbados. There is the shelter for abused females, but there's no shelter for the increased number of women that are calling us and the increased number of women that are calling us with children. And
Mr. Safri says the shelter is a must because Bridgetown is largely uncovered and there are not many options for the homeless to protect themselves. Now, he believes in the interim, some type of provision should be made for them.
In searching on the pages, I realized that there are not much shelters, if any, within the more area of Bridgetown. I know on the outskirts we have some, but one of the things that we have to consider is that in certain cases we're looking at persons with mental problems, you're looking at persons with a number of issues, and we would like to know that if there could be, by our powers that be, that positioning for the homeless to be able to have some sort of temporary location so that, you know, they could be in some way safe and that professionals that know how to deal with them can deal with them.
Lawmen are continuing investigations into a stabbing incident at Trent's Tenantry St. James this afternoon. They say that a stabbing left a man who appeared to be in his mid-30s in a semi-conscious state in a pool of blood. The man was transported to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital by ambulance. Lawmen want anyone who witnessed or can provide information regarding this incident to call the Holetown Police Station at telephone number 419-1700 or to call the emergency hotline at 211 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-8477. As Barbados enters its economic assistance program with the International Monetary Fund, a noted economist believes the program alone will not solve the country's economic crisis. Former Prime Minister Owen Arthur was addressing hundreds of Barbadians during a public lecture at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Kareem Smith was there.
In recent times, countries like Grenada and Jamaica, who dared to approach the International Monetary Fund for assistance, now boast some of the greatest stories of economic success in the region. So says former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, who argues the rigid conditions once associated with IMF programs have now made way for more inclusive policies better suited for developing countries. Mr. Arthur is, however, pleading with government to tread carefully as it embarks on the recently announced 4-year economic assistance program with the International Monetary Fund. He says it's a far cry from the usual 3-year program pursued by most countries or the standby arrangement negotiated by a previous Barbados government.
And in doing so, it has to be recognized that it would be going to the very outer limits of such an arrangement, with all the conditions prior, the structural benchmarks and provisions for the review to be associated with such an extreme program.
Last week, Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley, along with IMF Chief of Mission Bert Van Selm, revealed the country is entering a staff-level US $290 million program as part of the extended fund facility. Mr. Arthur, however, says this will not be enough on its own.
Barbados has to increase its reserves by about $600 million. The funds that are said to be on the way under its proposed EFF will not be $600 million and will not be in and of themselves be enough to deal and solve the country's external reserves problem. There will be a need for a policy dimension in order to help to control the reserves.
The former Prime Minister encouraged Barbadians to have no false expectations of smooth sailing during any IMF program. In fact, if not handled correctly, he warns it could leave the country in peril. Kareem Smith, CBC News.
Barbados and other Caribbean countries are moving to address the issues of youth violence and the lack in criminal statistics. They're seeking to implement the International Crime Classification for Statistical Purposes, or ICCS, which is part of a UNDP and USAID Carry Secure project. Now, speaking at the start of a 3-day implementation workshop, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Celia Pollard-Jones, said Barbados will derive many benefits from the ICCS.
I anticipate that with the implementation of the Carry Secure project, there will be stronger and more robust data management systems that will assist the police, the judiciary, and penal institutions in collecting information on victims and perpetrators of crime. I also envisage that this will be a useful tool to allow us to map crime across the country in real time.
Meanwhile, Carry Secure team leader Paolo Del Mistro expects the project will strengthen the region's response to crime.
And as some of you already know, Carry Secure project seeks to improve crime and violence policymaking and program development in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean using comparable and reliable national citizen security data. To achieve this goal, we are working very closely with representatives of your country to strengthen the Caribbean capacity to collect, analyze, and use citizen security data.
The adoption rate in Barbados is slow. That's according to Deputy Director of the Child Care Board, Denise Nurse. It appears Barbadians are a bit cautious about adopting children, and child care officials say some families prefer babies.
Because they want to take that child and mold that child. What we have found is that there are persons who go out of their way and help people in the communities with children, and then they will come to Child Care Board to have that adoption process regularized. We also find that there are not a number of very small children being available for adoption. So we do have people who have been approved as adoptive parents, but we don't have any children.
From October 4th to 13th, Barbados will be rocking with the music of top gospel acts from Barbados, across the region, and the United States. That's when the Caribbean Echo One People, One Sound Music Festival and Conference takes place. There will be a two-day conference and concerts, as well as several outreach programs. Speaking to CBC News, Echo Nation founder Arnold Gozzi Goslin said he expects an amazing event with scores of people coming to Barbados, especially for the conference.
We're glad to have several organizations internationally partnering with us. We have Josiah Ventures, who control the Extreme Tours in Europe, and they're coming to look for artists here in the Caribbean that they could take on tours, along with Extreme World Tours from the USA. They're also coming to see the artists and the caliber of artists that we have so that they could get on tour. And then following our conference on Sunday, October 7th, we have our Bold Face Mega Concert featuring guys like DJ Nicholas from out of Jamaica, Nathaniel from out of Trinidad and Tobago, and our very own Nisha Woods. And this concert is going to be a concert speaking out against violence.
The festival comes to a close on October 13th with the Pure Music Concert.
Featuring Jay Prince from out of Trinidad, as well as D1, a hip-hop artist from out of USA. And this concert is mainly targeting young people, and we are going to be encouraging them to make a stance and to stand up against the negative culture in the music. And it's all part of our Pure Music Challenge campaign.